They told me I was a disappointment. My brother was their golden child. No matter what I did, I was always in his shadow, always less than. When he failed, it was forgiven. When I succeeded, it was ignored. But then, everything changed. The day I got that acceptance letter into one of the top universities in the country, with a scholarship they couldn't even dream of affording, suddenly the family that turned their backs on me started knocking on my door again. Smiles, hugs, praise, the kind they never gave me when I needed it most. And the best part? They thought I would be grateful. They thought I'd forget the years of being invisible, the countless nights I cried alone while they cheered for him. They didn't know I had been planning something all along. Because I wasn't just leaving for a new life with my girlfriend by my side. I was going to make sure they paid for every insult, every rejection, every time they reminded me I wasn't him. They begged me to come back. But they had no idea what I had planned for them. Growing up in my family felt like starring in a play where I didn't have a script. My brother, Daniel, was the lead actor. He didn't have to rehearse, didn't have to memorize his lines, didn't even have to try. Everyone else did the work for him, applauding his every move, smoothing over his mistakes, praising him for things as simple as breathing. And me? I was the background extra. The one who blends into the scenery, unnoticed unless someone needed to throw in a cheap insult. I remember one night in particular. Daniel had just bombed a math exam, 40%. My mom wrapped her arms around him like he'd come back from war. It's just one test, sweetheart. You're brilliant. Numbers just aren't your thing. But when I brought home a 95 the same week, she barely looked up from her phone. Good. That's what's expected of you, she muttered, scrolling, her voice flat like I'd handed her a grocery receipt. That was the rhythm of my life. His failures were softened with excuses. My achievements were invisible. And no matter how hard I tried, I was always reminded, sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, that I would never measure up. It wasn't just my parents. Relatives piled on too. Family gatherings always turned into festivals of Daniel's talent. Aunt Claire would grab my arm just long enough to tell me, "You're so lucky to have a brother like him. He's going to do great things." Then she'd walk away, leaving me standing there, holding a paper plate of food no one cared about. Teachers joined the chorus. I can't count how many times I heard. Why can't you be more like Daniel? Or worse. Your brother had such a natural charm. You're quieter. Quieter. That word burned itself into me. Quieter meant lesser. Quieter meant forgettable. Quieter meant replaceable. But then there was Emily. I met her in my second year of high school, during one of those group projects. Where I ended up doing most of the work. She was different. She noticed the things no one else did. Like the way my jaw tightened when a teacher praised Daniel again. Or how I'd sit at the edge of the classroom, away from the spotlight I was never allowed to touch. One night, after I'd gone home frustrated from another argument with my parents, she called me. You there? She asked softly. Yeah, I sighed, lying on my bed in the dark. You sound like you're about to explode. I laughed bitterly. More like implode. Tell me. And I did. For the first time, I spilled everything, the favoritism, the way my parents made me feel invisible, the ache of being second place in my own life. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer fake encouragement. She just listened. When I finished, there was silence. Then she whispered, I see you. Those 3 words were enough to unravel me. Emily became my anchor. We spent late nights on the phone, sometimes talking about our dreams, sometimes just breathing into the line, both comforted by the other's presence. She'd sneak over after her shifts at the cafe, smelling faintly of coffee and vanilla, just to sit with me on the porch. I brought you this, she'd say, handing me a pastry she saved from work. You don't have to. I wanted to. Little things like that. She made sacrifices no one else would. Not grand gestures, but the kind that told me, without words, that I mattered. She was the one who encouraged me to apply to universities my family laughed at. "You're smart, smarter than you give yourself credit for," she'd say, pressing my hand. "My parents think it's pointless," I muttered once. Her eyes hardened. "Screw them. This isn't their life. It's yours." And for the first time, I believed someone. At family dinners, I would glance at Daniel, laughing, loud, radiant in everyone's eyes, and then at Emily, who would squeeze my knee under the table, grounding me. It was like living in two worlds. One where I was invisible, unloved, unwanted. Another where I was seen, valued, cared for. The contrast was almost cruel. I longed for my parents to look at me the way they looked at Daniel. To hear pride in their voices when they said my name. But deep down, I knew that day would never come. So I poured myself into my studies. If they wouldn't notice me for who I was, maybe they'd notice me for what I achieved. Every late night, every book devoured, every note scribbled until my hand cramped, I did it with a silent hope burning in my chest, that one day, they'd finally see me. But the truth was, even then, I already knew. They wouldn't see me until I forced them to. And when that day came, they'd regret ever making me invisible. It started small. The digs, the little cuts, the things Daniel said that everyone else laughed at but stuck in my chest like splinters. One night I was at the kitchen table, books spread out, highlighter in hand, memorizing equations. I knew I'd need for my university entrance exam. Daniel sauntered in, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and leaned against the counter, watching me like I was some strange animal. "Do you ever get tired of trying so hard?" he asked, smirking. I didn't look up. "Do you ever get tired of not trying at all?" He laughed, shaking his head. "Relax, man. It's just, you act like grades are gonna save you. You know Mom and Dad don't care. They already know who's gonna make it big." That last line hit harder than I wanted to admit. My parents didn't help. Every time I mentioned applying to universities, they'd exchange glances like I'd announced I wanted to become an astronaut. "You should be realistic," my dad would say, lowering his newspaper. "Not everyone's cut out for that kind of pressure." "I'm not everyone," I'd reply through gritted teeth. Mom would sigh. "We just don't want you to be disappointed. Focus on something achievable." Achievable. That word tasted like poison. Emily was the only one who seemed to believe in me, at least at first. When I told her about the applications, her face lit up. "That's amazing. You're going to crush it." I exhaled, tension easing in my shoulders. "You really think so?" "I know so." She kissed my cheek. "You're the hardest working person I know." But as the weeks went by, I noticed things. Little things. Like how she'd laugh too hard at Daniel's jokes when she came over. Or how she defended him when I complained about his digs. "He doesn't mean it," she'd say, rubbing my arm. "That's just his way of joking. His way of joking is calling me pathetic." She frowned. "You're taking it too seriously." It was subtle, but it gnawed at me. Then there were the study sessions. Sometimes, Emily would offer to help me review. We'd sit in the library, her quizzing me on formulas, her voice calm and encouraging. Those were the nights that reminded me why I loved her. But one evening, when I asked if she wanted to come over, she said, "Actually, I promised Daniel I'd help him with his English essay." I froze. "You're helping him?" "Yeah," he asked. "You know how he struggles with writing." I forced a smile. "Right. Sure." My chest tightened, though. She had never once offered to help me with my essays. The ridicule reached its peak when I told my family I'd applied to one of the top universities in the country. We were sitting at the dinner table, the air heavy with the smell of roast chicken. I cleared my throat. I submitted my application today. For Crestwood University. The room fell silent. Then Daniel burst out laughing. Crestwood? Are you kidding? That's, like, Ivy League level. So? I shot back. So? You're you. They'd chew you up and spit you out in a week. Dad chuckled, shaking his head. It's good to aim high, but let's be realistic. Mom added, we don't want you wasting money on application fees for places that won't even consider you. I clenched my fists under the table. I have the grades. I've been working on this. Daniel smirked. Grades aren't everything. Some of us are just, born with it. And then, as if the knife needed a final twist, Emily, sitting beside me, said softly, he's just teasing. Her words stung more than theirs. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the laughter, the dismissals, the way my girlfriend defended the very people who tore me down. I tried to shake it off, to remind myself she loved me, that she'd always been there for me. But the unease kept growing, like a shadow creeping across the walls. I wanted to believe she was still my anchor. But sometimes, anchors drag you down too. The cracks kept widening. One Saturday afternoon, I came home early from the library and heard voices in the living room. Daniel and Emily. I stopped in the hallway, out of sight, listening. Daniel, you're seriously wasting your time on him. He's never gonna be anything. Emily laughed, not loud, but enough. Don't say that. I'm just being honest. You could do better. Her silence stretched like a knife. I stepped into the room before I could think. What's going on? They both looked up, startled. Emily smiled too quickly. He was just joking again. Daniel grinned, unbothered. Relax, man. We're just talking. But the unease in my stomach grew claws. From then on, I started watching them more closely. The way Daniel leaned in when he talked to her. The way she didn't pull back fast enough. The way her phone lit up with his name more often than I liked. Nothing concrete. Nothing I could prove. Just shadows and whispers. But sometimes shadows are enough to tell you the light isn't on your side. Still, I pushed forward. I had to. Every insult, every dismissal, every laugh behind my back, I funneled it into my work. I studied until my eyes burned, until my body begged me to stop. Because deep down, I knew. If I got into Crestwood, it wouldn't just be my victory. It would be the weapon I needed. The family that ridiculed me, the brother who mocked me, the girlfriend whose loyalty I started to doubt, they'd all see. And when they came crawling back, I'd be ready. Not to forgive. But to make them regret every second they ever underestimated me. The letter came on a Wednesday. I was sitting alone in my room, the glow of my desk lamp the only light in the house. My hands trembled as I clicked the email notification, heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. Congratulations. That was the first word I saw. I read the rest in a blur. Accepted. Crestwood University. Full scholarship. All the nights I stayed awake, all the laughter I swallowed, all the times I bit my tongue while they cheered for Daniel, suddenly it all crystallized into those words on the screen. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in my life I smiled without bitterness. I had done it. Not them. Not him. Me. When I told my family, their reaction wasn't joy. Not real joy, anyway. At first, silence. Then, disbelief. You're joking, Daniel said, his voice sharp. I slid the printed email across the table. Read it yourself. He scanned the page, his smirk faltering. Dad leaned over his shoulder, eyes widening. Mom's mouth dropped open. You, got in, she whispered. Full scholarship, I said, letting the words linger. The room shifted. Their faces rearranged like masks. Mom's eyes filled with tears, tears I had never earned before. Dad clapped my shoulder, too hard, too forced. "We always knew you had potential," he said. I almost laughed in his face. Always knew. Even Daniel tried to recover, grinning with that same fake charm he wore everywhere. "Guess you're smarter than I thought," he said, voice dripping with envy. For the first time, I was the one in the spotlight. And I could see how much it burned them. Suddenly, everything changed. They treated me like I mattered. Dad asked about my classes. Mom bragged to relatives who hadn't remembered my name a month ago. Even Daniel, who'd spent his whole life mocking me, started acting friendly. "Hey, bro, maybe you could help me with some applications too," he asked one evening, leaning against my doorframe. I looked up from my desk. I thought I was wasting my time. He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, well. Guess you proved me wrong." But I could hear it, the bitterness under his breath, the envy laced into every word. They didn't respect me. They needed me. I was valuable now, a trophy they could hold up to make themselves look good. Emily's reaction was different. At first, she was thrilled. She threw her arms around me when I told her, tears shining in her eyes. "I knew it," she whispered against my chest. "I knew you'd make it." Her words warmed me, but something else lingered, a hesitation, a shadow I couldn't place. Over the next few weeks, that shadow grew. She became distant. Cancelled plans. Spent more time, studying, at the library, but when I showed up unexpectedly, she wasn't there. Her phone buzzed more often, and she guarded it like it held state secrets. And then there was Daniel. I caught them once in the backyard, sitting too close on the porch swing. He said something that made her laugh, the kind of laugh she used to save for me. When she saw me standing there, she jumped up too quickly. "Hey," she said, smiling too wide. "We were just talking. Just talking. Always just talking." But I knew. The truth came one night when I couldn't take it anymore. Emily had left her phone on the coffee table while she went to the kitchen. The screen lit up. A message. From Daniel. "I had fun last night. Can't stop thinking about it." My hands shook as I scrolled. Dozens of messages. Flirty, intimate, unmistakable. My chest felt like it was caving in. Every late-night call, every pastry she saved, every whisper "I see you," all of it shattered. When she came back, I was sitting there, her phone in my hand. "Explain," I said, my voice low. Her face was drained of color. "It's not what it looks like. Don't you dare." My hands clenched. "I gave you everything. And you." Tears welled in her eyes. "It just happened. It just happened." The words echoed, hollow, meaningless. I told my parents, thinking maybe, just maybe, they would finally be on my side. That they would see the betrayal for what it was. But instead, they defended him. "Daniel didn't mean to hurt you," Mom said softly, as if I were the one overreacting. "He's your brother," Dad added. "You can't let a girl come between you." A girl. That's all she was to them. And Daniel? He was still their golden child. Even after stealing the only person who ever made me feel seen. I stared at them, the weight of years pressing down on my chest. So that's it. He gets away with everything. Again. Mom's eyes hardened. "Don't make this about jealousy." He didn't force her. She chose. And there it was. The final blow. They would always choose him. Always. That night, alone in my room, I broke. Every sacrifice I'd made, every sleepless night, every ounce of myself I had poured into proving them wrong, it all felt mocked. Because in the end, even when I succeeded, they found a way to remind me I was second place. The girl I loved chose him. My parents defended him. The family that never saw me only wanted me now because I was useful. For the first time, I felt the rage burn hotter than the hurt. A cold, steady fire. And as I stared at my acceptance letter, still taped to the wall, I realized something. They thought they had me back. But what they didn't know was that this was the beginning of their end. After the betrayal, something in me changed. It wasn't loud. It didn't burst into flames. It cooled, like water poured over coal until the heat became something else, hard and sharp and ready. I could have left. I had Crestwood. I had a scholarship and a future that would not need them. Half the time, walking out the front door was the only thing I wanted to do. But anger is a patient teacher. It taught me that leaving wasn't enough. Leaving would let them think they won. Leaving would let them keep their excuses, keep their stories about who they were and why they were better. So I stayed. I played the part of the grateful son. I smiled when they fawned over my application like it was a puppy they'd just discovered. I let them believe they had me back. Stay a little longer, my mother begged in the afternoon. I told them my move-in date. You don't have to rush. I kissed her cheek. I sounded like I meant it. Sure, Mom. A few more weeks. My voice was steady. Inside, I cataloged everything. I needed leverage. People like my family respond to what they can see and touch: money, status, favors. Nothing pierces their vanity like something that makes them look good. If I could hold up my success as a mirror, make them believe they stood to gain from me, they'd lower their guard. Pride makes people careless. Greed makes them predictable. I made a list that first night. It was methodical, almost soothing. Evidence of Daniel's carelessness, lies, and gambling on charm. Concrete proof of Emily's messages and the nights she spent with him. Ways to manipulate my parents' sense of future advantage, hints of internships, donors, introductions, and even the appearance of needing family support for logistics. A public stage where the reveal would have maximum damage, a family gathering, a party, a dinner where they'd be surrounded by relatives to whom they could boast. Then I started the slow work of assembling those things. The first task was Daniel. He was clever in his way. He could charm a teacher into giving him extra credit. He could convince an aunt to cover for him. But he was also sloppy. Confidence is loud, it reveals more than it shields. I started small. I asked him to help me with college paperwork, not because I needed help, but because I wanted to be around him and watch. He loved paperwork that made him look useful. "Can you help me figure out the alumni donation form?" he asked one night, slouched across from me. I pretended not to notice the posture, the cool tone that said he didn't think he had to try. "Sure. Let's do it." He hummed, flicked through the pages, and that's when he slipped. In the margin of the form, I saw his handwriting, a list of names, amounts, and a note, a promise to borrow from a cousin next week to cover rent. It was small, stupid, and private. But it was a crack. I took a photo. The camera on my phone felt heavy in my palm. I told myself the photo was a file in a chain. Evidence for later. Nothing more. From there, I began to widen the net. Daniel lied, and those lies touched everything. He had bills to ignore, promises not kept, small thefts too stupid to confess, a returned credit card late fee charged to a cousin, a borrowed laptop forgotten at someone else's place for months. None of these alone were enough to shame him in front of my parents. Taken together, they were a pattern. I learned how to look without being obvious. I read bank statements when they were left open. I noticed the small inconsistencies in his stories. Once, he told Dad he was home studying all night. My phone recorded his Instagram story, a bar in the city, neon lights, midnight. I saved the story. It expired after 24 hours, but screenshots don't forget. The more I collected, the colder I became. It wasn't joy. It was clear. Each item was a stitch in the net I intended to throw. Emily was easier to break down and harder at the same time. You can love someone who betrays you. It's a strange arithmetic, forgiveness multiplied by habit. But I didn't want to humiliate her for the sake of it, I wanted the truth. I wanted the precision of a wound delivered in a place she could not defend. Her betrayal wasn't dramatic at first. It was threaded through texts, coffee meetups labeled, study breaks, and nights spent working late. Small deceptions allow for plausible deniability. I needed to remove the deniability. I watched her phone when she left it face down. I sat at the kitchen table and pretended to be engrossed in a letter while I watched her fingers fly over her own screen. I told myself I was looking for patterns, not pleasure. The truth is, I was looking straight at the bones of my life and counting how many there were. One afternoon, I stayed late at the cafe where she worked. I told the manager I wanted to help clean up. Daniel came in. They hugged a little too long. They laughed just a hair too intimate. When he left, she turned to me, eyes apologetic. I was checking on him, she said. Checking on him? I repeated, keeping my voice level. How often? Not, it's nothing. She set down the cup she was wiping, hands trembling. That night, when she went to the bathroom, I found a receipt tucked into her jacket pocket for a motel 3 towns over. Date and time circled. Her lipstick on the edge of the receipt is like punctuation. I wrapped my hand around the paper until it crumpled. I didn't confront her then. I needed more, a pattern. I needed her voice admitting what her texts hinted, or a location pinged to Daniel's phone, or photographs tucked away. So I rented subtlety. I learned her habits. I put passive trackers on a package she'd been expecting. I noted the times her phone left the house. I kept a log. When the log started to align, motel, late night, deleted messages, I stopped pretending it might be a coincidence. I took a screenshot of everything I could and exported her messages into a file. I copied emails and found bank transfers labeled "Help with Rent" that matched the dates she said she was at the cafe. The math made a microphone out of silence. With Daniel and Emily gathering into my net, I turned my attention to my parents. They were the real actors in the drama. Daniel was a symptom, they were the stage managers. If I wanted to hurt them in a way that would register, I had to speak their language, future advantage and social currency. So I created illusions. Not lies, more like plausible futures. I forged introductions that might be real if they wanted them to be. I mentioned internships at Crestwood that didn't yet exist but could, with the right appearance. I told small half-truths about donors I'd spoken to. My message to them was this: help me now and you might be seen. Ignore me and you'll miss out. It wasn't hard. My parents wanted to believe. They wanted their son's success to reflect on them the way a family portrait does. They wanted to boast at the next barbecue that their son had friends at the university who might one day help the family. It appealed to vanity the way sugar appeals to hunger. Maybe you could use us as references, Mom said one afternoon, scanning a list of my contacts, people I'd told them were professors or donors. She believed it. I kept it that way. I started to drop little seeds in conversation. I spoke to an alum who said they'd look out for interns from families they trusted, I said casually at dinner. Dad leaned forward. Really? Who? His voice was sharp with sudden interest. Oh, just someone I met at a talk. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. Hope is cheap and effective. I watched them wound themselves to me with the easiest of hooks, the promise of access. They talked about my future like it was already a club they belonged to through proximity. They bragged to friends, and every time, I logged the names and faces that would be present when I needed witnesses. There were setbacks, small and dangerous. Once, Mom found a photo on my phone, a screenshot of one of Emily's messages to Daniel. She picked it up like a hot coal and looked at me over its edge. "Is this," she began. Her voice was thin. "Panic is ugly in people you want to manipulate." For a second I pictured the whole plan falling apart, the trap revealed before it was set. I swallowed and met her gaze. "I can explain," I said, the rehearsed calm in my chest steady. She wanted to believe, and she wanted to be fair. "You should talk to her, then," she urged. I nodded. "I will." I didn't tell her I already had pages of proof. I didn't tell her the depth of the wound. She wanted to be the mother who could fix things. Let her keep that thought. It would make the final reveal cut deeper. Another near discovery came when Daniel snooped on my laptop. He came to my room, just to look for a pen, and left with 2 browser tabs open. He watched me too carefully. I found him later, trying to piece together my research. He called me into the living room, voice falsely casual. "You've been creeping around on my stuff." I smiled, the thing inside me sharp and patient. "Maybe." "Why?" "'Cause you always got time for that," he said. "You always have time to snoop." It was ridiculous. He accused me of the very thing he'd been doing. I let him. "That's not true," I said, folding my hands. "You know me." He left muttering. But that night I moved everything I'd collected to cloud storage under a name he'd never click. I changed passwords. I learned to hide. Setbacks taught me that the plan needed redundancy. Proof must be stored in multiple places. Timelines must be airtight. If I wanted to humiliate them, there could be no reasonable doubt left for them to cling to. And then there was the emotional work, the act. I had to be the person they wanted to believe I was, the forgiving son, the boyfriend who still loved his girl. Acts of benevolence became pieces of the theater. I cooked dinner and served it with a smile. I helped Daniel fill out an application for a community college program and feigned enthusiasm. I hugged my mother when she cried over a soap opera and did not let my eyes betray the winter inside me. "You're home so much these days," Emily said once, tasting the change. "I'm trying to be supportive," I answered. "We're family." Her hand found mine under the table, small and almost tentative. She squeezed. She did not know how close she was to the trap. I listened to their conversations at parties, gathering names that might lend their embarrassment more weight later. A cousin praised Daniel's charisma to anyone who would listen. An aunt boasted about connections in the local real estate market. I filed those names for the reveal, witnesses who would hear me speak and whose shock would be louder because they'd already invested in the lie. As the lines of evidence grew, so did my appetite for nuance. Revenge isn't a blunt instrument, it's a scalpel. The goal isn't to destroy indiscriminately but to punish in precise places. The pain must be recognizable and deserved, not gratuitous. I set small traps to test my reaction. I hinted to Daniel that I knew about his missed rent payments. I let a photograph of him at a bar accidentally be left on my phone's home screen, and waited to see who would notice. I mentioned, casually, to Mom that Emily had been up late, studying, with a friend from his class. Reactions were telling. Dad's face tightened at the bar photo. Mom's voice rose in concern when I mentioned Emily. Daniel grew paranoid and sloppy. When you expose the weak under pressure, they reveal their true colors. One evening, I arranged something discomfortingly delicate. I misplaced a file containing some of the screenshots of Emily's messages. I let it sit in plain sight on the coffee table. It wasn't the full archive, it was a sliced piece, enough to make a story plausible. In time, Daniel took the bait. He picked up the phone and scrolled. His face changed from amusement to alarm to anger. He didn't call Emily. He didn't come straight to me either. He began to maneuver. He tried to cover his trail, to delete things, to make it appear he had been the one wronged if anything came to light. That night, I watched him through the window, silhouette crouched in the dark near his car, his phone a betrayal in his hand. He was dangerous when cornered. I made a note, move the reveal sooner. But timing is a cruel partner. I had commitments, the landlord at Crestwood, orientation dates, a schedule to keep. I couldn't spring everything at once and walk away. The plan had to reach its ultimate stage while I was still present enough to steer the moment. Doubt crept into me at odd hours. Revenge can teach you how to see parts of yourself you don't like. Sometimes I imagined myself as someone I'd never wanted to be, cold, vindictive, joyless. Sometimes I wondered if I had crossed a line I could not come back from. Once, after a particularly long day of gathering proof and playing the forgiving son, I sat in my car and let the tears come. They were not the hot, gasping sobs I had once shed. These were smaller, quieter. Calculation doesn't need theatrical grief. It needs a clear head. I spoke aloud to myself then, as if negotiation could be done with the voice of my own conscience. This is about justice, I said. Not cruelty. That phrase sounded noble and right. It made sense to the parts of me that wanted to believe cruelty had no place in my actions. But as I drove home, it occurred to me that justice can be a trickster. It wears our own face. I steeled myself. The plan required me to act as if I were still hurt, still loyal, still naive. That act was the hardest part. Pretending to be wounded is ugly work. But it was necessary. Near discoveries continued. A cousin came by and mentioned seeing Daniel and Emily at a movie late at night. A neighbor saw Daniel leaving Emily's apartment past midnight and considered calling my mother. I deflected and redirected. People are allowed to have friends, I said to my mother when the cousin's voice trembled with gossip. We shouldn't jump to conclusions. They're just young, she answered, relief making her voice thin. I smiled to myself. The world needed reasons not to act. I gave them those reasons so the final reveal would be all the more devastating. This is where patience matters. People who are greedy for status move quickly, they want the reward now. I let them edge closer and closer to the cliff, letting their own eagerness push them into the open. I also worked to make my departure more public in the right circles. I told select relatives that I'd be giving a talk at Crestwood after my first semester, nothing firm, only a hint. That rumor spread because people love to brag. When the day of the big family reunion came, I planned to be the intangible presence hovering over their heads, the son who'd gone and returned with a price tag. I sent a cryptic email to a past teacher who had always favored Daniel, inviting them to my send-off. I made sure a few cousins would show up. I whispered to a neighbor to bring her bridge club. The audience mattered as much as the truth. Putting the stage in place was almost as pleasurable as the trap itself. The design of humiliation requires an architect's patience, where to light the room, which cousin to sit closest to the speaker, which aunt was best to witness the fall from grace. Human emotions are woven into patterns, and those patterns have seams. Then the first real obstacle, Emily began to suspect. She started asking questions, small ones at first. Why are you always on your laptop, she'd say, coming up behind me on the couch. Why do you have so many notes on Daniel? I deflected. It's part of my application prep. I'm doing a family history project. She frowned. That's weird. You're the weird one, I said too lightly, and we laughed. She seemed to breathe easier that day. But her questions grew sharper. Once, she reached for my phone and I moved it away. Her eyes narrowed. You're hiding something, she said. If I had panicked, the game would have ended. Instead, I offered a lie that felt like honey, I'm doing this for us. For our future. I don't want you to worry. She melted into my arms then, and for a second I felt a remnant of the old softness. I almost believed it. Almost. A week later, she tried to clean up her tracks. She deleted messages and reassured Daniel in an anxious whisper. Daniel, now under pressure, grew sloppy again. Envy is an ugly fuel, it makes people reckless. The more he feared losing the performance he'd always relied on, the more he pushed things into the open. That recklessness gave me leverage. And yet it also endangered everything. One wrong move and they could turn the accusations against me. Daniel could paint himself as the victim, the betrayed son of proud parents, maligned by the sibling who always wanted the spotlight. So I tightened backups. I sent copies of my files to a secure cloud with time-stamped logs. I made printed booklets of messages and receipts and left them in 3 places, a safe deposit box, a locked drawer at my aunt's house, where she'd never look, and with a trusted old teacher who owed me a favor. If anything happened to me, I wanted the truth to leak like a slow, unavoidable stain. By the time the family reunion approached, everything felt poised. I had photographs, bank transfers, motel receipts, screenshots of intimate messages, and a web of small, corroborating lies from acquaintances who could speak to Daniel's charm and inconsistency. I had also cultivated the theater, a crowd hungry for gossip, a stage, and a set of people who loved to see the child who made them proud and humiliated if it meant they could be seen as wise. For months I'd carried the weight of this plan like a second skin. It had fused me. It wasn't purely righteous. It had a taste of hunger. But I told myself that hunger had been born out of years of being unseen. The hardest part, by far, was convincing myself that I was doing it for justice, not for the particular bitterness that stung when I remembered Emily's laugh when she sat too close to Daniel, or my mother's bland indifference when I brought home a trophy of achievement. Each night before bed I reviewed the checklist. Each morning I woke with an unsteady calm. I rehearsed what I'd say, the order I'd present things, the way I'd look at each person when I asked, "Do you remember this?" Practice made the cruelty precise and, in my mind, surgical. I told myself once more, this is about showing them what their choices have cost them. This is about making them see. They had no idea how much I had prepared. They thought I was still the quiet son who would forgive anything because that's what I was supposed to do. They were wrong. They had been wrong for a long time. And right then, on the brink, the coldness in me felt like armor. I pulled it on and stepped out to the family reunion with a smile that belonged to the person I'd used all those years, the patient, mild one. Inside, everything was ready. They asked for one last family dinner before I left. They wanted photographs, speeches, the kind of staged sentimentality that makes everything look better than it really is. I said yes. If they'd known why I wanted the same thing, they might not have asked. The dining room was full. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, faces that had drifted in and out of my life like seasonal weather. The table glittered with cutlery and polished wine glasses. My mother had spent the whole day fussing, arranging flowers as if she could pin the moment to a postcard. Daniel lingered at the doorway, the easy smile curled around his mouth like a shield. Emily sat beside me, hands folded, lips a little too pale. She held my hand when the photographer came around, tight, almost pleading. I practiced my smile while they posed. It felt like rehearsed grief. I had a script, and a set. The evidence sat quiet and patient inside my bag at my feet, printouts, photos, receipts, screenshots, copies of bank transfers, and a recorder I'd used once during a late-night conversation with Daniel that had lasted far too long. When dessert plates were cleared and the house had finally quieted from the chatter, I asked to speak. It sounded like an ordinary request, the kind of thing people say at polite gatherings. Everyone turned. They didn't suspect a thing. "Before I go," I said, voice steady, "there's something I need to say." The room arranged itself around me. My mother's smile had that new strain, pride and worry braided together. Daniel shifted, confident. Emily's hand tightened in mine and I let her believe it was for comfort. "I love you all," I started. A few of them smiled, a few nodded. "But there's been a lot of pretending." Silence, like a held breath. Someone coughed. My aunt cleared her throat. I didn't rush. I took my time, because that was part of the cruelty, let the silence swell. I set a folder on the table and opened it. The clack of the clasps sounded too loud. I got into Crestwood with a full scholarship, I said, because they deserved to hear the thing that had put them all into this position first. Heads turned. Tears glistened in corners of eyes I'd never seen cried for me before. Congratulations, someone offered, a tentative applause like paper rustling. Thank you. I let them sit with that. But I didn't invite you here to bask in that. I invited you here to show you what your choices cost. I slid the first printout across the table, Daniel's rent agreement with a line he'd scribbled promising to pay a cousin back by a certain date. Next to it, a photo from his Instagram, him at a bar, neon lights, drink in hand. The two images, when placed side by side, made a small constellation of lies. Daniel told you he was studying, I said, looking at our father. He told you he was pulling his socks up. But he's been borrowing money and spending nights out. I spoke slowly, measured. Here's a rent notice he never paid. Here's a photo from the time he told you he was at the library. Daniel's mouth opened and closed. He laughed once, a thin sound. This is, out of context. He glanced at our mother, eyes searching for that protective smile she always had. Our mother's face flinched. The first ripple of doubt passed over her, like wind through leaves. I flipped the page. A motel receipt with Emily's name on the printed line. The time stamp matched a night she told me she was working late at the cafe. Beside it, a screenshot of a message, "Can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again?" Sent from Daniel's number. The room changed. Chairs creaked. A cousin's fork clattered against china. The air tasted like the metallic tang of a storm before lightning. Emily's hand left mine. She covered her mouth with the back of her free hand and then, quickly, she composed herself in the way people do when they've been caught and must pretend innocence. Her eyes were bright, wet, and frighteningly small. "This isn't real," she whispered, but no one really listened. The proof was a blunt instrument, denial could not hold under its weight. My father stood, face red. The pleading came at once, disguised as authority. "Daniel, explain this." Daniel swallowed. He tried to smile, the practiced charm. "It's nothing. That receipt, maybe it's a mistake. You know how receipts can." "You told us you were at the library," I interrupted, voice calm. "You told us you were looking for internships. You told us you were changing. We all wanted to believe that story. But stories can be purchased." He shifted in his seat, fingers clenching at the edge of his chair. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." "Is it nothing?" I asked, and I didn't even need to gesture. Their faces had already answered. I presented more. Bank transfers labeled "Help" from Emily to him. Screenshots of messages that blurred the line between flirtation and confession. A voice note of Daniel whispering my name with a cadence that belonged to secrecy rather than sibling banter. Each piece was small, together they were a mosaic of betrayal and neglect. My aunt's hands trembled. My uncle swore softly. A neighbor stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. My mother sank back like she'd been struck. "Why would you do this?" she asked my brother, voice thin. He looked at me like I'd pushed him off a cliff. "He's making this up." "You told Mom you loved her," I said quietly. "You told her you respected us." "I kept those words safe." "You used them. Then when I celebrated, you laughed." Daniel's face warred between rage and fear. He reached across the table and tried to snatch the folder from me. His fingers grazed the edge. I had expected that. I'd rehearsed the pull, felt the precise angle his fingers would take. I let him touch it and then pulled it back, folding it closed with a soft, deliberate motion. "You're insane," he spat. "You're spinning this." Emily stood up then, tears fat on her cheeks, breath hitching. "Please, please don't." "Don't what?" I asked, and the question cut like a blade. Don't tell the truth. Don't let these lies out. She sobbed, words tumbling. It was complicated. We didn't mean, she looked at me, broken. I thought I loved you. I thought you'd understand. You thought, I repeated. The phrase echoed in the room. You thought. That's a convenient refuge. I set another stack down, a printed exhibit of messages, dates circled with the same careful hand I'd used in every file. I slid it toward my mother. Do you remember the night he asked you for money for school fees? I said, watching her face. He said he needed help and you gave him £50. He spent it at a club that night. You remember that? You don't. Because you wanted to believe. She clutched her hands to her chest, a sound of hurt that wasn't all for show. He's my son, she whispered. I want to help him. And you did, I said. You helped him hide in plain sight. You gave excuses for his failures while you ignored mine. The room shifted again. Voices rose, a tangle of defense and confusion. My father pushed himself upright, anger blooming. You're humiliating your brother in front of everyone. I'm telling the truth. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I'm telling the truth about what you all pretended not to see. My eyes swept the crowd, landing on faces that had praised Daniel for years. You made him unaccountable. You made me invisible. Both are choices. Emily fell to her knees. Please, she begged, voice raw. Please don't ruin this. You already ruined it, I said. By choosing him over me. By choosing to laugh when I reached for a hand and offering yours to someone else instead. Her eyes were empty then. I'm sorry, she whispered, the words thin as breath. People's reactions were immediate and ugly. The cousin who'd always told me I was quiet, now leapt to Daniel's defense, throwing out half-remembered memories and vague accusations against me. An aunt took Daniel's side and accused me of overdramatizing. My father's face hardened into the man he'd always been when protecting what he thought was his asset. And then they begged. It started small, whispered pleas to just talk this through, and quickly warmed into a torrent. My mother came to me first, and I saw it, the look that had haunted me my whole life when she saw my brother. It was not the look of love, it was the look of someone who'd been given a chance to redeem themselves through someone else's success. Please, she said, voice stricken. Don't take him away. Don't. I stepped back. I let the hurt sit in its full weight. I let them watch me hold it and then set it down like a thing I'd grown tired of carrying. You begged me to stay, I said, eyes on my mother. You asked me not to go away because you wanted the brag. You wanted to be seen with a son who did well. Now that you are seen, you think you can reclaim me with praise and pleading. My father burst then, words like wounded animals. You will not speak to your brother like that. I won't speak to the enabler either, I said. Or to the woman who slept with him and expects forgiveness because history teaches you to forgive the favored. My voice was careful. I'd planned my lines like a chess player moves pieces. The family failed. Daniel swung, a raw animal. His hand struck the table, cutlery jumped. He lunged toward me, a ridiculous, violent flailing that ended in him knocking over a chair and gaping like a boxer who'd been rung. You're making me look awful, he shouted. You're ruining everything. You already did, I said. You ruined everything for me long ago. He grabbed Emily's shoulders, eyes wild. You were with him. You chose him over me. Her expression was hollow. I never, she began, then choked on her words. The details trudged out like tired soldiers. The lies unraveled. Suddenly privacy had been replaced by the public light, and every secret felt exposed and small. Someone in the back made a sound that might have been pity or amusement. I watched my family fracture in the way of fragile things under pressure. My mother covered her face and then sobbed like someone seeing the truth of the person she'd raised for the first time and not liking it. My father cried out, not in sorrow but in the startled way of a man whose reflection no longer resembles his idea of himself. Hands reached for me, then fell back. They wanted to fix it, to make apologies and promises that would stitch things together. I let them try. Say you'll forgive him, Dad urged, as if forgiveness could be ordered like a meal. I smiled then. It was cold and flat. Forgive him for what? For being their favorite? For being allowed to hurt? For betraying me and then expecting to be sheltered? No. I won't be the solution they can use to cover their failures. Emily crawled forward, pleading. Please, stay. We can fix this. Fix this. The word was brittle. Fix it how? By pretending? By pretending you love me and asking me to be the soothing son while he continues? Her face crumpled. I love you, she sobbed. You loved someone else when you were supposed to love me, I said. The words were not as satisfying as I thought they would be. Hurt has a way of deadening things that sound sharp on paper. The begging intensified. My aunt clasped my hand with both of hers. Please, we're family. Don't. Family, I echoed. We are family until it's inconvenient. The pleadings were unbearable in their familiarity, the way they circled back to me and demanded I be the steady thing while their house burned. I'd been their steady thing for years, silent, enduring, invisible. I had been their safety net they never acknowledged. Not anymore. I stood and walked to the doorway. I paused, hand on the frame, and looked back at all the faces I'd grown up with. Some of them had genuine sorrow. Some of them had the calculating gleam of people who had realized their social stock had collapsed. A few held a look of stunned betrayal that, if I were kinder, might have moved me. But mostly there was a frantic hunger. They wanted me returned, polished, forgiving. They wanted me to be the son who would erase their discomfort. Remember this, I said softly, to the room and to the people I'd once loved. You made your choices. I stepped into the hallway. The night air was cool against my face as soon as I opened the door. I left my bag inside, untouched, like a small mercy. As I shut the door behind me, the sound of their yelling rose and fell like waves. I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Behind me, the voices grew desperate and loud, my mother's cries, my father's curses, Daniel's shouts, Emily's sobs. The light from the window painted the lawn in pale rectangles and their faces into shapes I could no longer read. The house trembled with their need to patch what they had broken. My steps were steady. I had a train to catch in the morning, classes to register for, a future that did not require them. My scholarship would carry me into a world where I'd be invisible no longer. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something like victory. It was not the sweet, roaring thing I'd expected. It was small and strange, a cold, clear space where grief had been and a doorway opening into something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before. They begged me to come back that night. They pleaded. They offered apologies that tasted like oil. They promised to change. They told stories of regret and of how they'd been blind and would open their eyes now that someone else had shown them how. None of it mattered anymore. The cost of their love had been the currency I would no longer accept. I had seen them in the dark. I had catalogued the ways they chose, and I had decided I would not be an item to be picked up and used when convenient. I walked to my car, the air sharp with the smell of wet grass and diesel. I started the engine, feeling the hum beneath me like a small heartbeat. On the passenger seat lay the acceptance email printed on paper and the scholarship letter I'd kept as proof that my life had shifted. When I pulled away, taillights winked in the rearview mirror, small, bright, and then gone. The house receded in the distance, a rectangle of light, and then only the memory of a moment where everything I'd hidden was finally made visible. They begged. I left. The road stretched empty ahead of me, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through silence. My phone buzzed over and over in the cup holder, their names flashing on the screen: Mom, Dad, Daniel, even Emily. Each call faded into voicemail. Each message stacked on top of the last, desperate attempts to pull me back into their orbit. I didn't listen to a single one. For the first time in my life, their voices didn't matter. The night outside was thick and endless, the kind of darkness that used to terrify me as a child. But now it felt like freedom. No eyes watching. No comparisons. No endless, suffocating shadow of my brother. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the open road. I pulled over once, just to breathe, stepping out into the cool air. The silence hit me harder than the chaos I'd left behind. Somewhere behind me, in that glowing house, they were probably still shouting, blaming, begging. Maybe they were tearing each other apart already. Good. I tilted my head back, looking at the sky. The stars were faint, barely visible against the glow of the town, but they were there. Tiny, stubborn points of light. It struck me, then, how long I'd spent clawing for just a fraction of that visibility in my own family. To be seen. To be acknowledged. To be enough. And now? I didn't need it anymore. Their validation had been counterfeit from the start, handed out when it was convenient, withdrawn when it wasn't. They wanted me now because I was valuable, because I had something they could show off. Not because I was me. Emily wanted me because she thought I was safe, until Daniel flashed his smile and whispered promises behind my back. My parents wanted me because they could hold me up like a trophy, not because they ever loved me. The realization didn't sting anymore. It chilled me, steady and calm. I slid back into the driver's seat and closed the door. My reflection stared back at me in the rearview mirror, tired eyes, tight jaw, but no trace of the boy who used to flinch at every insult. He was gone. What was left was sharper. Colder. I started the engine again, letting the vibration steady me. My phone buzzed once more, Daniel's name flashing like an insect against glass. I silenced it. They called me worthless, I whispered to the empty car, the words sinking into the dark. My lips curved into a smile that felt nothing like the ones I used to force at the dinner table. Until I became priceless. The phone buzzed again. I didn't look at it. But I don't sell myself to beggars anymore. I shifted into gear, pressed the accelerator, and left them behind. For good.